Hello, and welcome to Exploring Axon, a podcast where we discuss Axon and its ecosystem. I am your host and Axonic developer advocate, Sarah Torrey. In this episode, my colleague Milan Savic and I will talk about Axon Server. I hope you enjoy this episode, and let's have a listen. Hi, Milan. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Sarah. I'm great. And you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about Axon Server. So before we do that, though, I want to know a little bit about you. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself, background, education? Where are you, by the way?
Sure thing. Yeah, so my name is Milan Savic. I'm currently located in Novi Sad, that's a city in Serbia, northern part of Serbia. This is
Right.
actually the place where I enrolled my faculty, the Faculty of Technical Sciences. There I specialized in computer science, and that's the place where I got my master's degree in computer science. And
Very nice.
that was some time ago, right? It was 2012, I believe, yeah.
Okay, not that long ago. Yeah, so that's perfect. And I hear that's a beautiful city. So maybe after this whole situation with Corona is lifted, I can visit one of these days. But yeah, so what did you? Perfect. Can you tell me a little bit about your education? So you studied computer science, but was it specialized in any sort of programming languages? I know you do mostly backend programming here at Axonic. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, actually, it was not focused on any language specifically. We did a lot of Java, of course. We did C# at faculty. There were, let's say, various range of projects that we did. So it was like software development in general, nothing too particular. Yeah.
So, but I understand that one of your passions from the short amount of time that I've known you as a colleague, and also I took a couple of trainings with you, is talking about Axon Server and node clustering, which we will focus on next episode for sure. So, very good. And how long have you been with Axonic?
With Axonic, I am more than 2 years actually. In March,
Yeah.
I believe next year it is going to be 3 years. So I'm
Okay.
not from the very beginning of the company,
But pretty close though.
pretty close, yeah.
Yeah, and did I understood correctly that you were one of the first remote hires? Is that correct?
Yes, that's true. That's true. Me and Sarah Pellegrini are.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think it's worth mentioning that as of right now, Axonic, I think half of the company, we're all working remotely, which is really, really neat. So it's cool because I get to have these little snippets of, video chats with everybody all over the place, which is really cool. So can you tell me, what do you do at Axonic? I know you do a lot of stuff.
Actually, it's going to be a long talk if I have to summarize what are all the things that I cover.
Short switch package. Yeah.
So basically, let me try to say that I focus mostly on Axon Framework and Axon Server development. Apart from that, educating people to use Axon Framework and Axon Server, so giving trainings, talking at conferences, online trainings, things like that. Apart from that, I'm also helping out our customers to use the framework in the way it is the best for their use cases, to use Axon Server, things like that.
Right. Very good. Perfect. So let's dive into Axon Server. And since we there's a lot to talk about Axon Server itself, let's sort of focus it on 5 different categories, if you don't mind. So let's go through a little list that I have here. So first thing I'd like to talk about is Axon Server was built basically to be it was basically purpose built for Axon framework applications. And when I was reading more about Axon Server and its beginnings and so forth, I came to something that was interesting to me and that was the explanation of why we use Axon Server instead of just any other server, for instance, for Axon framework applications especially. So for instance, the plain HTTP REST calls are commonly used in microservice architectures. but they have some clear drawbacks. For instance, they're verbose and slow and synchronous in nature. And while the load balancing is possible on the HTTP level, consistent routing based on aggregate ID is very difficult. Can you explain that to me a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, before Axon Server era, let's put it like that, we had, we still have actually, extensions for the Axon framework to connect all of those Axon framework applications to work together in a distributed environment, right?
Right.
It is easier to have this extension than to write communication between your services manually, definitely. However, the configuration part and setting all those things up, for example, for the Spring Cloud or JGroups even,
Yeah.
it becomes a lot difficult if you have to do it by yourself. And in the
Right.
end, we just figured out that we are not that much experts in Spring Cloud or JGroups or RabbitMQ even for
Right.
distributing events, and we do not want to start working on customization of those parts of your application. So
Right.
we thought of, okay, Axon framework needs a new player in the scene, and that's something that is actually going to connect all those Axon framework applications. And that's why
Right.
Axon Server is playing the central part of your Axon ecosystem, and it is helping you to connect all of those small dots of Axon framework applications. So message routing through the Axon Server is done. We know how to do that based on the type of the message that is being
Right.
dispatched. Yeah. And also, on the other hand, we had event storage implementations for SQL databases, for Mongo database, um, and we ended up, okay, in Postgres, I have this problem. In MySQL, I have this problem. Again, we are not experts in MySQL or in Postgres, and we
Right.
just didn't want to do that anymore. So we thought of, okay, now we need specific event storage for those type of systems, and that's also what Axon Server plays.
Very good. So you mentioned messaging, right, within or between Axon Framework and Axon Server. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah. Whenever you want to issue a command, receive an event, or issue a query towards some external application,
Right.
that needs to go on the wire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Axon Server is on the other side of that wire and listens to all those messages that your Axon framework is dispatching. And based on the type of the message and based on the handlers that were subscribed to the Axon Server from other applications, it knows where to route this message and what is the best
Ah,
application to handle this message. And that's the messaging part of
right.
Axon Server. Yeah.
And so I can understand then why we recommend Axon Framework users to use Axon Server in their applications, because that makes life a lot simpler, correct?
Exactly. It requires so less configuration when it comes to other open source extensions that we offer. And it knows Axon framework. Let's say that they are really good friends, and it
Yeah.
knows what one Axon framework application can do. And if you want to do something, you just tell it
Yeah.
to Axon server, and then it knows where to route your message, who can handle that message, and that's the
Ah,
beauty of it. Yeah.
yeah. So, not to get too detailed on that one, can you do a little bit more explanation on how that happens? How does Axon Server knows that which events are coming where, or how to store those events, for instance,
Yeah,
or where
definitely.
to store them? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mentioned this briefly, but now I'm going to elaborate a little bit more.
Sure.
Whenever your Axon Framework application is starting, it should know the location of at least one Axon server node, and it will tell it, okay, these are the handlers so these are the messages that I can handle.
Right.
I can handle these commands, I can handle these events, and I can handle these queries. And then Axon Server keeps that information in its registry. When there
Right.
is a specific command, then it decides, okay, this is the application that can handle this command because it told me that it can handle it.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is basically how it works. When it comes to the routing, all those types of messages, commands, events, and queries have different routing patterns. For example, for a command, there is only one destination, right? But for the event, all applications that are capable of handling that event are going to receive that. So this pops up. And for queries, there are different routing types. So maybe I'm interested in only one application to give me the response, or maybe I want to gather my query and want to receive information from all over the place, whoever can respond to my query, or I just want to have one application respond to me and then receive real-time updates whenever that information changed, such as subscription queries in Axon.
Yeah. That is really, really interesting. And I'm sure I will come back to you with more examples of that at a later time. But let's continue with the general Axon Server connections this time, for instance. Let's talk about Axon Server being client-initiated connection. So what does that exactly mean? In Axon Server, all connections are initiated by the client, and after the connection has been established, the message can be sent from client to Axon Server and vice versa. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Axon Framework is configured to know, as I said, at least one the location of at least one Axon Server node, right? You can configure more there. It is definitely better because if that server is down, then it's going to be easier for the Axon Framework to connect, but let's leave that aside. And we are using Grpc protocol. Basically,
and can you tell me why?
Yeah. Grpc protocol is built on top of HTTP2 protocol, and there are definitely some benefits that we are using having that Grpc in our system. That is, for example, it is binary. It is not text as HTTP1, so you can use, for example, protobuf for messaging formats. That combined with the header compression that comes with HTTP2 results that we have a smaller message footprint. So the amount of data that you transfer between Axon Framework and Axon Server is much smaller.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So that means a lot faster too, right?
Exactly. One other thing that adds to this speed of communication is a multiplexing over a single TCP connection. So that's also possible with HTTP2. And so you can have over one TCP connection, you have several streams communicating.
Okay.
Yeah, and it is a two-way communication, right? That's client initiates the connection, and then server can communicate to the client, can send messages to the client, or client can send messages to the server, and that's really powerful mechanism that we exploit a lot in Axon Server.
Perfect. And because the client is communicating with the server first, then it makes it a lot easier because then the server already knows that a route to communicate with the client back. So then that is established and makes things a lot faster and easier. Fantastic.
Yes.
Can we talk a little bit about Axon Server being handler aware? So for Axon framework-based applications using, for instance, as we talked about, command handler, event handler, query handler, annotations, Axon framework uses whatever implementation of Axon bus is available to register those methods. So if used with Axon Server version of these buses, then the client replays the information about the handlers used in the application, and therefore the Axon Server knows which components are available to handle which types of messages, and hence allowing for full automation of routing. And this basically goes back to what you mentioned a few minutes ago about how Axon Server knows how to handle these messages. And everything. So then we, of course, this was already responded. And if you'd like to add something more to it, that's great. But otherwise, we can jump to the next section, which is easy to integrate.
Yeah, well, actually, I don't have that much to add because it would be too much information, I say, for this session. But
Yeah, yeah.
in the essence, that's the thing. Okay, I'm the Axon Framework application, and I know to do these things. I want to let you know. Please let other people in the ecosystem know about this, and
Yes.
that's the point.
Yeah, that's very cool, very cool. So let's talk about why is it easy to integrate. So can you talk to me a little bit about Axon 3 and then Axon 4? I know we changed a lot of things in terms of, especially with Axon Server and the integration of Axon Server as default in Axon Framework applications.
Yeah. In Axon 3, there was Axon Server Connector. It is still there in Axon 4.
Yeah.
That Axon Server Connector was a dependency that you would add manually to your POM, to your Gradle configuration, whatnot. So whenever it is on uh, class path, it is going to configure a communication towards Axon Server. If you're using
Right.
split boot, it is just like that, drop and replace. Just add dependency and everything is automatically set up for you, right? The only thing
Okay.
that needs to be configured is the location of at least one Axon Server node. And that was the
Right.
story for the Axon tree. Axon Server connector actually communicates with Axon Server. It uses gRPC. Of course, it is not restricted for you to use Axon Server connector, but it is much easier for you. You
Right.
can build, if you're not using application that is built on top of JVM. For example, you want to build a Go client that communicates with Axon Server. We had some situations in the community regarding this. I'm still not sure what is the outcome of those, but
Yeah.
yeah, essentially Axon Server has an API, gRPC API, which you can implement. There are a lot of gRPC clients that can be used here. Then you implement it, and essentially that's all you need to do. Of course, it's not that trivial.
Right.
However, it is possible.
Yes.
And that's why Axon Server Connector that comes with Axon Framework plays really nicely because it gives you all that functionality for you.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but that was in Axon 3,
Yes.
or is so in Axon 4, we basically made it a default, so you don't have to use the connectors anymore.
Yes, exactly. Not exactly. In Axon 4, you're still using a connector, but it is a default.
Right.
Right? You don't have to
Okay.
do anything. It will automatically try
Gotcha.
to connect to the Axon server. However, this Axon server connector is the thing that is, let's say, from the beginning of the Axon server. So we learned a lot. And by learning
Right.
a lot, we just decided, okay, there are some things that we can do better. And with the Axon 4.4, we
Right.
published a Java connector, which is completely separated from the Axon framework repositories. It
Okay.
is a Axonic repository. It is a plain Java connector. So it is plain Java implementation towards Axon Server. It does not know anything about Axon Framework. But in
Oh,
Axon
okay.
Framework, you still have that notion of Axon Server connector, which is basically a wrapper around that Java connector. This Java connector is easier to understand because you don't have to know anything about Axon Framework. And it
Right.
basically uses as a template for other languages. If you want to
I
build,
see.
for example, for Go or for some other language, for Rust, I don't know, then you
Yeah.
can just take a look at this blueprint of our Java connector and you can implement your own.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So you talked briefly about Spring Boot applications, but what about communicating with Axon Server directly via Open HTTP plus JSON or gRPC interfaces?
Yeah, it is possible. It is possible. You can, if you're not satisfied with our Java connector, or or
Better be.
basically, you better.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, you just do not need all of that functionality that we provide. Maybe you just
Yeah.
want to subscribe to the event stream and just listen to live updates of events.
Right.
You just want to build a small application that does that. You don't need to bring the whole Java connector. Although it is a thin layer, but you don't have to. You can just use HTTP protocol, or you can use Grpc protocol that we provide. So there are two APIs that are provided in parallel by Axon Server, and then you implement your own lightweight connector for really specific usages of Axon Server.
Right, and that's all available on our GitHub repository, I'm assuming, right, for Axon Server.
Yeah, exactly. So
and Axon Framework.
Exactly. Axon Server API is a public API. It is open source, free and open source to use by Axonic on Axonic repositories, GitHub repositories. So you can take a look at all messages to see what you actually need to implement, all in the Grpc interfaces that you need to implement.
Very cool. And the final main point I'd like to address for our session today is distributed as jar file. So I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, but can you get a little bit deeper into that topic? So for instance, can Axon Server be run on premise and also on cloud?
Yeah, that's true. It can be run both. That's why we distribute it as a jar file. Essentially, what you need to run Axon Server is plain Java, and that's it. We give you a jar file. If you're using Axon Server Enterprise Edition, then you need a license, of course. But in the end, that's just a Java process that you run, and you don't need to install anything else. For example, it can be run, as I said, on cloud. It can be run on premise or in some virtualized environment, such as Docker or even Kubernetes. Of course, with Kubernetes, you have to be a little bit careful because it has to be a stateful set there. It is essentially your event store. It's your database, and you don't want to move your database a lot, right? You don't want to move the location of your event files a lot. That's why it is advised to be a stateful set. We have some guidelines how you can run Axon Server in Kubernetes environment, for example, for Docker as well.
Yeah. As you mentioned, I think there's several blogs that several of our colleagues have published on that. So it's also available on our website, and also I believe on our no, I want to say developer portal, but that's to come a little bit later. But yes, definitely. I'm ahead of myself a little bit. Okay, great. And can we talk a little bit about what came before Axon Server? Actually, what were the basically the starting points of Axon Server? For instance, I read about briefly about Axon Hub and Axon Database and Axon Event Store. So can you tell me a little bit about those?
Yes. Well, Axon Server is basically a child of Axon Hub and Axon DB. Firstly, we started by developing Axon Hub and Axon DB as two separate products. Axon Hub is responsible for message routing, and Axon DB is responsible for storing your events.
Okay.
However, the usage pattern of those is that our clients would purchase both of them. And then we didn't have any clients to use only Hub or only DB. The maintenance, the deployment of those, now you have two components that you have to take care of, and it is not that convenient. In the end, what we did, we just created Axon Server that is Axon Hub and Axon DB together, right?
So we basically just merged them together.
Exactly. Now you have only one part of your system, one component that you need to take care of, to deploy, and that's it. That's why we introduced Axon Server.
That's really interesting to know, because I had read about Axon Hub, but then I didn't exactly know what it was, and I knew Axon DB was basically the event store.
Yeah.
But it's really nice that you clarified that. It's really great. So before we close for today, can you touch on Axon Server Standard Edition and Enterprise Edition?
Yes.
And tell me a little bit what those differences are.
Yeah. So Standard Edition is basically mostly intended to be used in development, not so much for production environments.
Yeah. So for main businesses and things like that.
Yeah, of course. Axon Server Standard Edition basically gives you opportunity to run only one context, not more than one, which is usually not enough in real life scenarios. and you can run only one instance of that Axon server. It is not
Right.
really good for fault tolerance, right? With Axon server, you have a possibility to have a multi-context environment. So when you are segregating your domain into several bounded contexts, for each of those
Right.
contexts, you can create a context in Axon server to resemble that structure of your application.
I see.
When it comes to availability, you can have Axon Server Enterprise Edition run in clustered mode. So you can have more than one Axon servers in your system. This definitely gives you the better availability. Your data is replicated
Right.
across those nodes. So basically, data safety is improved. If you have
Yeah.
a minority of nodes down, your cluster still can function and your data is there. It is not lost.
Right.
It also gives you different node roles. So you can have, for example, backup nodes
Okay.
in your system, active or
Right.
passive, it really depends. You can have a secondary nodes that are, for example, when you want to, your event store is getting bigger and the space that you need to store all those events just increases. You want to have a secondary node and to move old events that are probably not going to be read that frequently to move to the
Right.
secondary node. For example, on a cheaper hard disks and things like that.
Yeah.
Since now we are having a cluster of nodes in Axon Server Enterprise Edition, we can improve on horizontal scalability. So not all communication is going to go through one node, as in Axon Server Standard Edition, but you can scale communication across all Axon Server nodes. Of course, when it comes to the writing of event transactions, that still has to go through the one node called a leader of a cluster. We'll talk about that, I believe, in the next session,
In the next episode, yes, definitely.
how this works internally. That we cannot scale, but everything else can be scaled. Reading of events, routing of other messages can be scaled out
Yeah.
horizontally. There is also one thing that I would like to point out when it comes to the Axon Server Enterprise Edition, and that is auto balancing of tracking event processors. Let me give you an example. You're running an application that process the events published by various applications, and now you figure out that there are more events to be processed. So you need to have
Right.
more instances of that application processing those events. Then you can use Axon Server to auto balance those tracking event processors automatically for you. And it's a really nice feature. It can scale up, scale down your threads available for processing. Sorry, not threads, segments available for processing those events. And it's really
Events.
cool feature. You don't
Yeah.
have to do anything manually, things like that.
Yeah. And
Those
we
are
will delve deep into that next time for sure. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And those are the main points that I would stress out. There are definitely more differences, but these are the most important ones.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you so much, Milan. This was a really, really great session for me because Axon Server was sort of a thing sort of in the distance that I didn't know so much about. And now I have a much better understanding of it. So I really appreciate that.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So next time, for sure, we're going to talk about Axon Server Enterprise Edition mainly, and the clustering of nodes and everything. So we will definitely delve more deeply into that subject. Would you like to add anything at the end that maybe I didn't cover?
Well, when it comes to the basic information about the Axon server, this is, I believe that we covered everything, and I wouldn't add anything to spoil this perfectly aligned agenda.
All right. Oh, you're too kind. All right. Well, I wish you a fantastic day, and I will speak to you very soon.
All
Have a
right.
great day.
Have a great day
Take
too.
care. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye. Bye bye.
I hope you liked our talk. Please join us next time as we delve deeper into how Axon Server works, as well as clustering in Axon Server. Thank you for listening, and happy coding!